Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Do you know what's the meaning of hypocrisy? Pretending to be what one is not. Do you know what's virtue signaling? Showing the world how good you are, displaying your virtues or moral correctness. Can you guess who practices both? Europe. It sanctions Russia, lectures India about buying Russian oil, and then goes about importing Russian goods. Goods worth almost $200 billion while the war was on. Tonight, we'll bring you the numbers. We'll show you how Europe is still bankrolling Russia's war. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is dumping the US dollar. How did it become the world's leading currency, and why is the world losing patience with it? We'll discuss all of that. Why is Saudi Arabia joining the China-led security coalition called SCO? What does it mean for the US? In India, the number of Wuhan virus cases is rising. In Kenya, there's no end to opposition protests. There's violence on the streets now. And in space, scientists have found what they're calling an ultramassive black hole. It can accommodate 30 billion suns. We'll bring you a report. The headlines first. Russia arrests a journalist from the Wall Street Journal over suspicions of spying. Moscow says he was caught red-handed working for the interests of the American government. Finland to cross the final hurdle in its NATO membership goal. The Turkish parliament is set to approve Finland's bid after months of negotiations by President Erdogan. Finland decided to join the NATO last May, ending decades of military non-alignment. Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, ends his self-imposed exile. He returns home from the US after 3 months. Bolsonaro faces legal trouble for allegedly inciting riots in January this year after losing the election. Berlin will allow Muslim teachers to wear headscarves. Teachers in the German city have been banned from wearing headscarves since 2005, but recently several court rulings have said a blanket ban on headscarves is discriminatory. And a big setback for Indonesia, FIFA strips it of hosting rights for the Under-20 Football World Cup. It comes after 2 governors wanted Israel banned from the competition. Indonesia and Israel do not have any formal diplomatic ties. The dollar is facing a revolt. The world knows it as the king of currencies, but the dominance of the dollar is now under threat. More and more countries are looking for alternatives, and China's yuan is emerging as a clear challenger. Beijing is pursuing a string of deals. The latest one is with Brazil. Brazil and China are ditching the dollar. From now on, they'll use their own currencies for trade. So China is pushing the yuan. What about the Indian rupee? It's not far behind. The Indian rupee is also emerging as a serious contender. And why are these trends significant? Because currencies drive commerce. The dollar's dominance gives the US an outsized influence on the global economy, and a shift away from the dollar will only hurt America. It will also hasten the rebalancing of the global economy. In the next few minutes, we'll look at this trend and where this is going. First, the events in Brazil. Brazil announced the deal yesterday, and it did not come out of the blue. The agreement had been in the works for a while. A preliminary pact was signed in the month of January. It laid the foundations of the final agreement, and it's a fairly simple deal. Earlier, Brazil and China used the US dollar for trade. Now they will deal in their native currencies. China will use the yuan, and Brazil will use the Brazilian reais. How does it help? It will save costs. Look at the official statement from Brazil. This is what it says. The expectation is that this will reduce costs, promote even greater bilateral trade, and facilitate investment. China is Brazil's biggest trading partner. Last year, their bilateral trade was worth over $150 billion. So it makes sense for Brazil to ditch the dollar. But what's in it for China? Beijing is on a mission. It wants to internationalize the yuan. It is building a large coalition of partners. These are countries that will use the yuan instead of the US dollar, and Beijing has made considerable progress in this direction. It has secured bilateral pacts with 41 countries so far. The total value of these agreements is more than $500 billion. So the yuan is gaining international acceptance. And the petro-yuan is rising. Now, what is the petro-yuan? It's not a different currency. Petro-yuan is simply using the yuan to settle oil bills, just like the petrodollar. And China is making an aggressive push for this. It is finding takers in oil-producing nations. Russia, for instance, it has embraced the yuan. So have Iran, Venezuela, and some African nations. Now, reports say Saudi Arabia is also considering the switch from the dollar to the yuan. And this is going to be a very important development. We know that Riyadh has been at odds with Washington and is getting closer to Beijing. But ditching the dollar will be a decisive move. Meanwhile, the Indian rupee is also competing in this race. Last year, India's Reserve Bank made a move. It allowed international trade settlements in the Indian rupee. It's still early days, but India has made progress. Banks in 18 countries have shown interest. They've opened special accounts, and these accounts will help them settle trade payments in the Indian rupee. And these are the countries we're talking about. They're ditching the dollar. They want to use the Indian rupee for trade with India. Earlier this year, Brazil and Argentina floated an idea. They're thinking about a common currency for South America. Halfway across the world, Southeast Asia too is losing patience with the US dollar. In Africa, countries like Kenya are dumping the dollar. They'll use the Kenyan shilling for oil imports. So here's a question. Why is all of this happening now? Why is there a global rebellion against the dollar? Also, how did the dollar become the world's reserve currency? It happened after the Second World War in the year 1944. 44 allied countries met at Bretton Woods in the US. 44 countries came together. They wanted to avoid another financial turmoil, so they created a system, a set of rules that would shape the global economy as we know it today. It led to the creation of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, also the World Bank. The Allies also agreed to a new exchange rate system. Each country pegged the value of its currency to the US dollar, and that's how the American dollar gained its dominance. The Bretton Woods Conference gave the US immense power to dominate the global economy. It created two financial institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, largely controlled by America. And they're still quite powerful and still led by the US. As for the dollar, it is still widely used, both inside and outside the US. About $1 trillion notes are in circulation outside America. Some 40% of the world's debt is issued in US dollars. Nearly 60% of the global currency reserves are in US dollars, and close to 90% of all foreign exchange trade involves the US dollar. The world economy is hooked to the dollar, but now it wants to give up this addiction, but it will not happen overnight. The dollar's downfall, though, has begun. And here's another blow to US interests. Saudi Arabia is shifting out of the American security umbrella. It has become a member of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a security grouping led by China. Saudi Arabia is not a full member yet. It has joined as a dialogue partner. But this is the first step to full membership, and it signals Riyadh's intent to foster closer ties with Beijing. Remember, China recently brokered a big deal, a truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They resumed diplomatic ties, and China has usurped America's traditional role as mediator in West Asia. Now, Saudi Arabia is taking the next step. It is joining the SCO. To understand what it means, let's first understand the SCO. It's a security bloc, but it's not a uniform bloc. The SCO has 8 full members: China, Russia, India, Pakistan, and some Central Asian countries. How effective will a security bloc be if it has both India and Pakistan, and India and China? So what is India doing in this group? It became a full member in the year 2017, years after Russia pushed for India's membership. At the same time, China pushed for Pakistan, and it became a member in the same year, 2017. So India, China, and Pakistan are in the same group. But that did not stop China from trying to invade Indian territory in 2020. It also did not stop Pakistan from trying to infiltrate into Kashmir. Moral of the story? The SCO is not some kind of Eastern NATO, but it does have military, economic, and cultural cooperation. And as weird as it may sound, last year, Pakistani, Chinese, and Indian troops exercised together. They held a joint anti-terror exercise on Indian soil. That's the SCO for you, a coalition of contradictions. Now, Saudi Arabia wants to join it. It shows two things: China's expanding influence and America's shrinking role. Saudi Arabia's ties with the US have been frosty ever since Joe Biden became president. He famously vowed to make Saudi Arabia a pariah on the global stage. This was over the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. He's said to have been killed on the orders of MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, also its de facto ruler. So Biden's threat was directed at MBS, and before he could make good on this threat, the Saudis are moving on. They're looking for friends elsewhere. The Saudis are leaning towards Russia and China. On oil production, Saudi Arabia sided with Russia rather than America. On the truce with Iran, it has chosen China over America. Riyadh is being pragmatic. It is also deepening economic ties with China. Saudi oil giant Aramco has started a joint project with some Chinese firms. This project is in northeast China. It is worth $12 billion, and Aramco holds a 30% stake in it. It has also been investing in Chinese companies. An Aramco CEO recently said this, I'm quoting, "Saudi Aramco aims to play a key role at the heart of China's long-term energy security and high-quality development." Now look at these developments together, and you will see that Saudi Arabia is playing the long game. It is diversifying its partners, moving away from its dependence on the West. But again, this will be in the long term. Saudi Arabia cannot snap ties with the US overnight. They've been partners for 8 decades now. Saudi Arabia's entire security infrastructure is American-made. Analysts say it would take over a decade to replace American arms and defense systems with Chinese alternatives. And the withdrawal of American troops would still be risky. Because despite the thaw in Saudi-Iran relations, it's not all peace, rainbows, and sunshine. They're still fighting a proxy war in Yemen, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that war may end soon, but the years of hostility will take time to neutralize. The SCO may become another forum for Riyadh and Tehran to interact. Iran, too, is expected to become a full-time member soon. So the West Asian rivals could use the SCO to find common ground. But again, mending ties will take time. Riyadh's move today is basically a signal to the Americans that the clock has started ticking on American hegemony in West Asia. This story is about Europe's hypocrisy. It truly knows no bounds. On one hand, it slaps countless sanctions on Russia and lectures the world on democratic values. On the other hand, it funds Putin's war machine. The European Union is still very much in business with Russia. Russian exports are still flowing into Europe, and energy is just one part of the equation. In the next 4 minutes, we'll get you the full picture. And just so that you appreciate it better, here's a quick recap of all the virtue signaling from Europe, all the lectures and criticism heaped on India for buying Russian oil. I also have a few quotes for you. The first one is from Ukraine's foreign minister. In December last year, he had called India's Russian oil purchases morally wrong. If you benefit because of our suffering, it would be good to see more of your help addressed to us. That's what he had said. And he wasn't the only one. A former top European diplomat sent this message to India. India cannot stay neutral on Ukraine crisis. EU disappointed with New Delhi's position. But now let's look at how Europe is still doing deals with Russia. We'll start with the trade numbers. What's the value of Russian goods shipped to Europe? From March 2022, when the war began, to January 2023, the EU imported Russian goods worth $186 billion. $186 billion through the course of the war. What kind of imports were these? The biggest chunk was LNG, liquefied natural gas. Remember, the EU has sanctioned Russian coal and oil imports. Not once or twice. So far, we've seen 10 rounds of sanctions. But none of them touches gas imports from Russia. And the story gets better. Not only is Europe not sanctioning Russian gas, it is also buying more of it. Europe's LNG imports have increased since the war began. In 2021, the EU imported 16 billion cubic meters of Russian gas. 16 billion. Do you know what the figure was in 2022? 22 billion cubic meters. This is a jump of more than 37%. So Europe is still buying Russian energy. And like I said, it's just one part of what they're buying. Here's another. Nuclear supplies. Europe is importing nuclear supplies from Russia. And very conveniently, nuclear supplies are not part of European sanctions. Again, what kind of supplies are these? They have nothing to do with nuclear weapons. These are for civilian use. Things like enriched uranium, the kind that is used to generate nuclear power. Europe is getting it from Russia. Last year, the EU imported nuclear products worth nearly 814 million US dollars. Do you know what else they're buying from Russia? Diamonds. In 2022, the EU bought diamonds worth $1.52 billion. Also fertilizers. The EU spends $2.82 billion on Russian fertilizers. This is an increase of 40% from 2021. This is how they're punishing Russia, by raining dollars. Major Russian companies have been kept out of sanctions, like Alrosa, a mining giant in Russia. Rosatom, the state-owned nuclear power company, and Gazprom Bank, the financial arm of Gazprom, which is Russia's state-owned gas company. So this is the reality of European sanctions. It's a classic case of cherry-picking. Europe sanctioned the easy targets, but it won't pull the trigger on energy imports because that would involve political costs. And that could lead to potential backlash at home. Recently, a European leader made an admission. This is the Prime Minister of Poland. Listen to what he said. We are buying, as European Union, lots of Russian gas, lots of Russian oil, and President Putin is taking the money from us, from the Europeans, and he's turning this into aggression, invasion. But it's not just Russian imports, really. Western companies are also bankrolling Russia by paying an exit fee before they leave the country. Moscow had introduced a new rule. Anyone who leaves Russia, who wants to leave Russia, must make a contribution to the Russian budget. And how much do they have to pay? 10% of their earnings. 10% of the earnings from the sale of their businesses in Russia. Earlier, this contribution was voluntary. Now, Moscow has made it mandatory. But before these rules were changed, many companies voluntarily contributed to the Russian coffers. They were so eager to leave. So they paid the 10% tax. And this only underlines the dilemma of Europe and the West at large. Decoupling from Russia will come at a heavy price, a price that they're still not ready to pay, but a price that they expect others, like India, to pay. Pakistan's brotherhood with China is being tested. Pakistan is failing to keep Chinese establishments safe, so it's shutting them down. A number of Chinese businesses have been shut in Karachi. They're owned by the Chinese and frequented by Chinese nationals. Reports say the Karachi police received some intelligence. It raised the possibility of fresh attacks, so the cops decided to shut down these establishments. Earlier, they had warned the same businesses. They were asked to make specific security arrangements. What kind of arrangements? Installing CCTV cameras, biometric systems, security alarms, and other modern-day security gadgets. These businesses apparently did not comply, so they had to be shut down. And Pakistan now seems helpless. And China doesn't look too confident about Pakistan's security arrangements. In February, China's foreign ministry issued a warning. It said Chinese citizens, may be quote-unquote at high risk. Soon after that, a section of the Chinese embassy in Islamabad was shut down. China said this was because of technical issues, but the move only drew more attention to the security risks in Pakistan. In the same month, orders were issued in Pakistan's Punjab. Again, this was about the security of Chinese nationals. The local government refused to provide security to these nationals, only to those working on CPEC. They were entitled to state security. Now, CPEC is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It's a part of BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese nationals are involved in these projects. And Pakistan says it will provide state security only to those who are working with CPEC. But the Chinese nationals who do not work for CPEC have been asked to make private security arrangements. And this admission is telling, because Pakistan is basically asking Chinese citizens to make their own security arrangements because they are clear targets. And the Pakistani state is in no position to help them. Hence, the shuttering of establishments. They're shutting down businesses and telling Chinese nationals to hire private security. The Chinese are living in fear in Pakistan. Their security challenges are complex. They face threats from not one but two groups. There are separatists who are angry about Chinese investments/colonization in Pakistan. And then there are the terror groups nurtured by the Pakistani establishment, now targeting Pakistan's most important ally. Let's talk about the separatists first. On this front, one name stands out: the Baloch Liberation Army. Earlier, it targeted the Pakistani army for its acts of repression in Balochistan, and now it is going after China. That's because China is investing heavily in Balochistan, especially in Gwadar. China is building a port in Gwadar. So the Baloch Liberation Army is training its guns on the Chinese. In recent years, they have launched high-profile attacks. Last year, they conducted a suicide attack in Karachi. This was near a Confucius Institute. It killed 3 Chinese teachers. In June 2020, the Pakistan Stock Exchange was attacked. Why was it targeted? Because it is partly owned by a Chinese consortium. Then in 2018, the Chinese consulate in Karachi was targeted. Also, why is the Baloch Liberation Army targeting the Chinese? They believe China is taking over Balochistan's resources. So they have put Chinese nationals on their target. The second major threat are the terror groups in Pakistan, like the Pakistani Taliban and the ISIS Khorasan. They too have targeted Chinese nationals. In 2021, there was a suicide bombing in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. 9 Chinese workers died in that attack. Some analysts blame the Pakistani Taliban for this. So with each passing year, as China widens its footprint in Pakistan, the terror threat is rising. And so far, the Pakistani state has failed to deliver. Beijing has pushed Islamabad. It wanted to send Chinese security contractors to Pakistan, but Pakistan refused. In January, Beijing sent another warning. China's new foreign minister spoke to his Pakistani counterpart, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, and this is what he said. I'm quoting. The Chinese side is highly concerned about the safety of Chinese citizens in Pakistan and hopes that the Pakistani side will continue to take strong security measures. The Chinese requested strong security measures, and Pakistan's response was to shut down Chinese establishments altogether. How should Beijing assess this? There's only one way to look at this. Pakistan's incompetent security establishment has failed China yet again. And big news for Indians working in the United States. A US court has decisively ruled in their favor. It applies to all those who hold an H-1B visa. Their spouses can now work in the US. This will mean more financial security for Indian workers in America and another win for people-to-people ties between Washington and New Delhi. Remember, there was a concerted effort to make life difficult for such workers. A group called Save Jobs USA was gunning for the jobs of Indians. The court has ruled against them. Here's a report.
Foreign workers in the US are breathing a sigh of relief. An American court has upheld their right to work. It said that the spouses of H-1B visa holders can work in America. The ruling will benefit Indians the most. First, let's understand the basics. An H-1B visa allows foreigners to work in the US in specialty occupations. These occupations require specialized knowledge. We're talking about fields like biotechnology, computing, economics, education, research, journalism, medicine, and health. You need an H-1B visa to work in these fields in America if you're not a citizen. And these are just a few examples. Say you have an H-1B visa and a job. Your spouse and dependent children will get something called the H-4 visa. A lot of these H-4 visa holders also started working in America. This was thanks to an Obama-era regulation. It allowed H-4 visa holders to work in the US. Recently, a lawsuit was filed against them. This was done by a group called Save Jobs USA. They said the regulation did not have the approval of Congress, meaning H-4 visa holders should not be allowed to work. But that argument has been struck down. A US district judge ruled that the US Department of Homeland Security had the authority to issue work permits to H-4 visa holders. She said that the US government has been allowing this practice for years and that the Congress has both implicitly as well as explicitly ratified the practice. On the face of it, this might not seem like a big deal. But ask Indians living in the US, and they'll tell you it's perhaps the most significant ruling that has come their way in a long time. Sure, Indians aren't the only ones who get an H-1B visa, but they get the maximum number of these visas. In 2020 and 2021, Indians got 74% of the H-1B visas issued by America, and the trend continues. The US has issued 100,000 work authorizations to the spouses of H-1B visa holders. A considerable number of these are for Indians, and the court has ruled in their favor. They can now continue working and supporting their families financially. Also, the US needs Indian workers. There's a reason why so many Silicon Valley executives are Indians. They are highly skilled, motivated, and known to deliver results. So this is a community which Washington cannot afford to antagonize. The US has taken a series of steps to mitigate the troubles of Indians traveling to the US. In September last year, the Biden administration had promised to help Indians out. Here's what Secretary of State Antony Blinken said.
We have a plan when it comes to India to address the backlog of visas that's built up. I think you'll see that play out in the coming months, but it's something that we're very focused on. These connections, these people-to-people ties, whether it's students, whether it's business people, whether it's tourists, whether it's family, this is what really links us together, and the last thing we want to do is make that any more difficult.
A lot has happened since. Last month, the US said it was reintroducing domestic visa revalidation, especially for H-1B and L-1 visa holders. Again, Indians would benefit a lot. Since 2004, Indians living in the US had to travel to India to get their visas revalidated. And that was a big hassle. It took months, if not years, to get this done. But soon, such visa holders will not have to travel to their country of origin. Instead, they can get their visas revalidated in the US itself. That's not all. The US says the wait time for visitor visa interviews in India has come down by 60% this year. And Washington has set a goal for this year. It plans to issue 1 million visas to Indians in 2023. It has already processed more than 200,000 applications in its embassy and consulates across India. So the US is finally paying attention to the troubles faced by Indian applicants and workers. It's proof of the deepening bilateral partnership and the value Indian professionals bring to the table.
Now let's turn our focus to Kenya, an East African country with more than 47 million people. It has been rocked by protests. The agitation began against the rising cost of living. It soon devolved into an anti-government demonstration, and now there is violence on the streets. At least 2 people have been killed. Looters have ransacked homes and businesses. A mosque and a church have been vandalized. The country is tense. Today, it saw a third large-scale protest. Kenyan police forces have ramped up security in the capital. But why are these demonstrations taking place? You see, they've been organized by Kenya's opposition parties. They ask protesters to gather every Monday and Thursday. The man leading this campaign is Raila Odinga, the most prominent opposition leader of Kenya. He contested the presidential election last year. He lost to William Ruto. Ruto is now the president, and Odinga has made a record of sorts. He has run for the post of president 5 times, and he has lost every time. But in this election, he was quite close. Reports say he secured about 49% of the vote. So he has popular support, if not the numbers. And he's weaponizing the support, taking the government to task. Like I said, the protest began with people complaining about the rising cost of living. Kenya, like most of the world, is dealing with the fallout of the war in Ukraine. There is rampant inflation. It has severely affected the cost of staples like food and fuel. And President William Ruto has made it worse. He has cut food and fuel subsidies. Electricity prices are set to rise next month. Ruto says he's doing this to try and curb Kenya's burgeoning public debt. His motives may sound logical, but they've bred resentment. And they've allowed the opposition to capitalize on public anger. Odinga is using this to challenge Ruto's rule. He wants the previous election overturned. He wants Ruto ousted. His supporters have rallied behind him to take on the government, and the government is fighting back. Police have used tear gas and water cannons on protesters. They blocked off Odinga's rally. The government tried to ban protests altogether by calling them illegal. But this goes against Kenya's constitution. The law protects the right to peaceful protest. But the government justifies the ban. It says the protests are not peaceful. Also, political violence in Kenya is not new. The worst was after the 2007 election. More than 1,000 people were killed then. It exacerbated ethnic fault lines in the country. Even today, all the factions are under attack. Government forces are being pelted with stones. Odinga's private businesses have been vandalized. Hundreds gathered and destroyed former President Uhuru Kenyatta's property. A mosque and a church were attacked. There is complete chaos. And at this time, President Ruto is in Germany on an official visit. But he vowed to protect public property and punish the perpetrators.
I want to tell you that we have no exceptions on respect for the rule of law. And we also don't have exceptions on protection of property or lives. Everybody must respect the rule of law, and everybody is entitled to the protection of their property and of their assets and of their lives by the government of Kenya. It is unthinkable for any government to participate in the destruction of property of citizens. I want to tell you, as I tell Kenyans and members of the global community, that the government of Kenya will make sure that the property and lives of all Kenyans, including our visitors, will be protected, and those involved in criminal activity, including the invasions, will be brought to book.
Meanwhile, Odinga has said it's actually Ruto who's behind the violence.
Ruto's hands are all over this violence. When Azimio La Umoja called for protests in line with Article 37 of our Constitution, we never envisaged that in desperation, the state will respond by hiring goons and mercenaries to rain terror on peaceful and innocent Kenyans.
It's a grand political mess. Everyone's pointing fingers at one another, and ordinary Kenyans are the ones caught in the crossfire.
To me, it's a big loss. I've lost over 500,000. This is a very big loss. I don't know how I'll recover it. I don't know where I'll start from. I totally don't know what I'll do.
Religious authorities in Kenya have asked people not to protest. International observers like the African Union are calling for dialogue. They say it's the only way forward because Kenya has seen enough violence. What it needs now is for cooler heads to prevail. And just when we thought that the pandemic was behind us, the Wuhan virus has resurfaced. Cases are rising in India. Authorities are gearing up. We don't know what lies ahead, but we should be prepared for whatever it is. The government and all relevant authorities say the situation is well under control. The positivity rate is not alarming yet, but it can shoot up within days. We've learned it the hard way. Is another wave in the making? And is India prepared to deal with it? Here's a report.
3 years since the Wuhan virus leaked out of China, the world is still on the edge. Pandemic's impact on the global economy can still be seen. Countries are in distress, and supply chains are yet to recover. But just when we think some normalcy is returning to our day-to-day lives, the Wuhan virus raises its ugly head again. This time, it's India, which recorded 3,016 new COVID cases on Wednesday. That might not look like a dramatic figure to you. After all, it's nowhere close to the number of cases India recorded at the height of the pandemic. But this is the highest infection count in the country in the last 6 months. And it's a jump of 40% from Tuesday. The positivity rate on Tuesday stood at 2.7%. Again, not alarming, because a positivity rate under 5% generally means the situation is under control. But we cannot get complacent. Just in January, the pandemic was thought to be over. On 17th of January, India recorded 89 new cases, the lowest since March 2020. The latest rise in Wuhan virus cases coincides with a sharp uptick in cases of seasonal influenza. In either case, it's time for you to put the mask back on. The Indian government is watching the Wuhan virus graph very closely. Last week, Prime Minister Modi held a high-level meeting to review the country's preparedness to deal with another wave. The highlight was this remark: "The pandemic is far from over." That's what the Prime Minister said. So the mood in New Delhi is clear. There can be no laxity. Both the government and the public need to be vigilant, and the government is doing its part. The Health Ministry has written to 6 states that are contributing to the spike in COVID cases. Next month, India will hold mock drills to take stock of preparedness of our hospitals. Public and private health facilities in all districts will participate. Today, India is far better prepared to deal with a surge in Wuhan virus cases than it was 2 years ago. More than 90% of India's population is fully vaccinated. The recovery rate in this country stands at almost 99%. So don't press the panic button just yet. Countries like Russia, Japan, Canada and the UK are also seeing a rise in COVID cases. Most of the world has learned how to live with the Wuhan virus. There is no magic wand to make it disappear. So we must remember the lessons we have learned to avoid the havoc the virus created a couple of years ago. Mask up and don't let your guard down.
You can't manage what you don't measure. This is a famous quote. It's also true for the gender pay gap, which, just to put it out there, is not a myth. It's the reality of our time, something that almost half the world has to put up with. What is the gender pay gap? It's the percentage difference between the salaries of men and women. Globally, women are paid about 20% less than men. And in 95% of all occupations, men earn more than women. Now, Australia wants to tackle this problem. Australia has become the latest country to make companies reveal their gender wage gaps. Australia has passed new equality legislation. It will apply to all companies that have more than 100 employees. All such companies will have to report the differences between what men and women earn. And this was long overdue, we say. Women in Australia earn about 23% less than men. To make better sense of this, let's think of it in terms of money. A woman in Australia is paid at least $1 million less than a man throughout her working life. $1 million less. How does this look on the global stage? Australia ranks 43rd on the Global Gender Pay Gap Index. The index is topped by Iceland, Finland, Norway, New Zealand and Sweden. They have the least pay gap. And the worst performers are Afghanistan, Pakistan, Congo, Iran and Chad. What about India? India ranks 135th on a list of 146 countries. It doesn't look good, and that's an understatement. India has a lot of work to do in this direction. Perhaps learn from Australia. Pay gap transparency is a very good move. Study after study has shown that transparency helps reduce pay gap. Look at the results of one survey. Making salaries transparent showed a reduction in wage gap by 50%. And this is good for employers too. When wages are more transparent, employees tend to work harder. That's what studies say. There is little debate among experts over the benefits of this. A growing number of countries agree. A lot of them are pushing for wage transparency. Australia has joined the list of countries like the UK, Japan, the European Union, and parts of the US. Governments are trying to improve transparency to accelerate pay parity. Take Denmark, for example. Their legislation requires firms to show their gender statistics. And since it passed, there's been a 7% reduction in gender pay gap. So reporting the pay gap is certainly vital. It's a very important first step, but it's not the end of the story. This is not a silver bullet that will automatically lead us to the finish line. Let's go back to Denmark. It saw improvements, but it came at the cost of a slow wage growth for men, and there was no real change in the wage growth of women. Now look at the US. They're forcing companies into wage transparency. Their gender pay gap has not gotten worse, but it hasn't improved either. It's been stuck for the past 2 decades. Women still earn 82% of what men do in America. You see, reporting the problem is easy, it's just data. What's difficult is changing mindsets. Companies have to acknowledge the gap and reshape attitudes. And they must do it urgently, because at the current pace, it will take more than 100 years to eliminate the pay gap globally. 100 years, which is unacceptable, because women have done their part. They've ticked all the right boxes. They're more educated now. They've increased participation in the workforce. They take on more senior roles. So now it's up to governments and firms to do their part. The ball is in their court. In order to break the glass ceiling, women need to first get off the sticky floor. Our last story tonight is about a gigantic mass murderer, one whose secret weapon is gravity. And it's the biggest our cosmos has ever seen. We're talking about a black hole. It's ultramassive. And this is not an adjective scientists throw around loosely. Actually, nobody does, because it's not even a real word. Ultramassive. This black hole has probably earned it. It's about 30 billion times the mass of Sun, 30 billion. Ultramassive black holes, like this one, are rare and elusive. Where did they come from? Are they hungry beasts? To put it nicely, if you fell into one of them, you would surely die, but it's not clear how. They are an enigma, and it's ironic how everything we know about how the universe works literally depends on them. Here's a report.
Welcome, Earthlings. We're about to tell you about a dark place. It's okay to get lost here, because this is a place of no return. We're talking about a black hole. And scientists in the UK have found the biggest one yet. Want to understand the gravity of the situation? Pardon the pun. This black hole is about 30 billion times the mass of the Sun. But let's start with the basics. What is a black hole? It's a region in space with an immensely strong gravitational pull. Think of it as a Dementor, you know, the fictional character from Harry Potter? The way a Dementor sucks in all of your joy, a black hole swallows everything. And we mean everything. Anything that's too close or too slow or too small to fight the gravitational force. And it's so huge, it can swallow entire planets and stars. It can rip them apart. Not even light can escape it. And nothing is faster than light. So you can imagine, with every bit of mass, a black hole grows. At this point, you may be wondering, how would you die in a black hole? Will the gravity rip you apart? Will it crush you? Or will you be flushed into oblivion? Sadly, no one knows. It's one of the greatest debates in physics. The black hole that has now been discovered is being hailed as an ultramassive one. What are these ultramassive black holes? As the name suggests, they're the most massive objects in the universe, with between 10 to 40 billion times the mass of the Sun. It's believed that they can be found at the center of all large galaxies, like the Milky Way. No one's sure how they were formed. Some believe it came from a merger between massive galaxies. This would have happened billions of years ago. And these ultramassive black holes are extremely rare, making this discovery very exciting. It opens up doors to find more such black holes, especially those beyond our local universe. And astronomers may be able to discover far more inactive black holes, because most black holes are in an active state, and you don't want any matter to go anywhere near those. Let's just say there's a lot of heating up and radiation. Black holes are obviously scary, they're dangerous, and we don't know enough about them. But fear not, scientists say our planet will not be pulled to its doom. So hopefully a black hole won't eat us up, because they're light eaters.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Thailand. A wildfire engulfed an entire mountain in a national park. This happened just 2 hours away from Bangkok. Initially, it was difficult for firefighters to access the location, but now efforts are on to put out the blaze. In the US, there seems to be no respite for people in the flood-hit state of California. Roads and agricultural land are entirely submerged. Meanwhile, Israel has launched a new version of its spy satellite. The aim is to enhance round-the-clock regional monitoring. In India, a cheetah from Namibia gave birth to 4 cubs. This has happened for the first time in 7 decades. Cheetahs had been extinct in India for 70 years. Indian Prime Minister Modi called it wonderful news. And finally, what happened today in history? There was an attempt to assassinate former US President Ronald Reagan. The year was 1981. Reagan was newly elected. He just delivered a speech at a hotel in Washington and was ready to leave in his limousine when a bullet hit him in the chest. It fractured his ribs and caused internal bleeding. The shooter, John Hinckley, told the investigators that he tried to assassinate Reagan to impress a famous actress. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.